Hello, my name is Danielle Murray, and today I'm going to be talking about judgment and decision making. So here is a brief overview of those two topics. When thinking about judgment and making life choices, it can be easy to assume that everything is already known. Everyone has judgment and biases. Everyone's made decisions at some point in their life. It would be impossible to not have participated in these two things. Judgment and decision making are more intertwined than most people consider. While everyone participates and has some knowledge of these two things, there is much that the average has to learn. Judgment is what allows people to make decisions and informed conclusions. Decision making is choosing to follow one path and receiving an outcome and not being able to follow the other path and receive that other outcome. Life is a series of decisions that build up over time and create the bigger picture. Choices are made daily. Some are unimportant, like what is for dinner that night, while others can completely change the trajectory of somebody's life. Judgment is what allows these choices to be made. While everyone has judgment, the challenge is having good judgment. Many things come together to give somebody good judgment. One of those things is listening. While this may sound obvious, participating in listening can be more complicated than most people think. There's different types of listening, such as active listening versus passive listening. People with good judgment are fearless in their listening to people with different backgrounds and consider their experiences, their viewpoints, and their ideas whenever they make choices. Another thing that can show people have good judgment is that they're not afraid to admit when they don't know something. These people also acknowledge their own biases and emotions and then work to confront them and take them out of the decision-making process. The important thing is that good judgment is learned, and even if your judgment isn't the best, you can still work on it and make it better over time. The trick is taking new information and truly understanding it, and ensuring that little details are paid attention to, and keeping overconfidence to a minimum. So the next thing I'm going to look at is a closer look into judgment and decision making and a theory that is very important to both of them. So, for a long time, the dominant theory regarding judgment and decision making was rational choice theory, which assumes people make choices based on logical reasoning and how those decisions will affect them. The thought is that people will make the decision that will affect them the best. This is connected to politics and the economy and practically everything else. It serves as a baseline for society, a basic framework for society. However, this has been questioned over the years since things like biases have been researched more. Another thing that rational choice theory being the framework has been questioned is because it relies on sound judgment, which requires knowledge and proper understanding of how things work. And some people unfortunately do lack this. While sometimes this lack of knowledge and experience is not anybody's fault per se, because there's different things that can affect it, such as coming from a school district that's underfunded or an area where it's not as many teachers. It is important to consider this when we look at this theory. It basically boils down to good judgment leading to sound decision making. Even with the questioning of this theory, it is still the framework of our society and has a good standing. When making decisions, things like risk assessment come into play. This can be seen in such things such as politics and our climate crisis. It has been seen that things such as college education and skin color come into when people make their risk assessment. It is made at the individual level. For example, when we take the climate crisis into consideration, women are more likely to place a greater risk factor on the climate crisis than men, while people of color are more likely to place a greater risk factor of the climate crisis than white people. And then the group that has the least risk factor on the climate crisis would be conservative white men. It can be difficult to tell who is right in these matters because risk is subjective and there's not really a firm definition of risk assessment because it's subjective. It depends on who is placing that risk assessment. And then risk assessment determines the course of action that that individual will choose to take in that area. Okay, so next I'm going to talk about some examples in real life and how this can affect people in their own lives instead of just kind of like a broad overview. So As stated, decision making and judgment are really critical when talking about rational choice theory, which is the framework for many things our society is based upon. I've given this example already, and it is politics, and it relies on the assumption that people will vote out of self-interest. While some people like to say politics doesn't matter that much and don't do that much research, and while others will do a lot of research, find as many facts as possible, take the time to memorize those facts, it shows that judgment does go into voting for a specific candidate because, as stated, they have to understand the knowledge to form their good judgment. And then there's also the individuals that don't vote. We have to take those into consideration too. Informed voters are the best kind of voters, but when we look at these, we have to question if uninformed voters or non-voters are worse. So when someone does not vote, they give away their power and voice. So at least voting uninformed gets people involved in the political system, and it allows them to take some power. Even if it isn't the best kind of voter, at least they are participating. It is important to consider that if more people voted, the political candidate would have to behave differently and better because they would have to be more accepted by a broader group of people. Okay, as stated previously, risk assessment is how people come to make decisions. An important decision that is made on risk assessment is voting. So we're still talking about politics here, specifically in the presidential election though. Sometimes elections, specifically presidential election, can change how people view facts and shift the risk that is associated with them. And when this happens, sometimes judgment can move also, and the original decision can flip. So when we look back at the 2020 election, it has been that Trump voters placed a lower risk assessment on COVID-19 than those who voted for Biden. Risk assessment differences can be attributed to many different things in this instance, but a main one would be media. And when I say media, I'm talking about traditional media and non-traditional media. Traditional media, the news. When we look at news channels like Fox News and CNN, they have different risks placed on COVID-19 due to the political parties they're affiliated with. And then I'm also talking about social media like TikTok and Facebook. With the traditional news, there's more of a factual base in it, whereas social media, anybody can get on there and say anything they want, even if it has no base in facts. They can just lie, and this can change how people will view things and how they place that risk on it, even if it's not true, which is kind of unfortunate. The media takes in effect the risk they associate with things, and this risk can be economical and health related when we think about COVID-19. And I think it's safe to assume that these things also affected the 2024 election. There's just not as much data to prove this because it just happened and there's not as much data. And then one more example of judgment and decision making in real life is economics. With these, human variables are present because humans run the economy. Like many other examples, rational choice theory is present here. At first, it can be kind of hard to see how people's choices and self-interest can correlate to the economy. But an example I would give is a family struggling to meet ends meet at the grocery store. There are many items that the family can choose, and there are many different brands that item are. So let's say hypothetically the family needs paper towels and the store brand's $15, while the name brand is $22. In this instance, rational choice theory is going to say that the family will buy the store brand because it would be in their best interest to do so. They'll have the other money to buy something else they need. And then this decision can also affect the economy overall because it can change things such as supply and demand. Another thing regarding rational choice theory and economics, that an economist, Adam Smith, was the person who did find rational choice theory, which is just interesting because I didn't think that an economist was who found this theory. In conclusion, judgment and decision making are very important. Everybody has judgments, everybody has biases, and everyone's had made a decision.